Good morning, everybody. My name is Abby Janis. I'm a program coordinator with the Center for Nonprofit Management, and I want to welcome you to today's community conversation in conversation with regarding transgender visibility with Phil Cambucci. A few sentences about this amazing person. Phil has been a Nashville resident for 13 years. During his time in Nashville, Phil has started 2 businesses and continues to find opportunities for professional growth and reinvention. Phil is currently in the process of starting his 3rd business and also building a new nonprofit organization for community benefit. He and his partner Stuart live in historic Buena Vista with their 2 dogs. In their free time, both Phil and Stuart are avid travelers, enjoying dining, performance art, and film. Just for everyone's knowledge, we are recording today's session so that this session can be public to anyone who missed it. And I will be recording any resources that you all share during today's discussion. So if you want to share any, please share those in the chat, and I'll be sure to share those out with the rest of our community. And also feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as well. All right, Phil, throwing it to you.
All right, thank you, Abby. So I want to start our conversation off today by starting with a typical our standard opening meeting statement. And then we can move on to our great discussion. So we take time today to acknowledge that the land that we are meeting on is the traditional homelands of the Chickasaw, Cherokee, Shawnee, and Yuchi people. This land has long been the center for Indigenous people to gather, trade, and maintain kinship ties. This land was also violently taken under settler colonialism through genocide and open warfare, and that the region that is now Tennessee still struggles for sovereignty, self-determination, and justice. The genocidal acts of settler colonialism extended to the peoples of Africa and their enslaved descendants. The vestiges of slavery remain present throughout the United States and directly affect the descendants of enslaved peoples, descendants who have also helped define the rich culture of Africa and other enslaved nations. These genocidal patterns of violence against peoples of African descent and Indigenous people have been replicated to exclude and harm people from many intersecting marginalized identities: religious, minoritized, disabled, and LGBTQ identified people, BIPOC, and POC writ large here in the United States. Today, we acknowledge that we are living, breathing, laughing, loving, grieving, and sharing space on unceded territory. May we lean in and learn to honor the historical and contemporary presence and power of the people and their belief that we must be caretakers of the lands and waters for the livelihood of future generations. So today we're going to be talking about Transgender Day of Visibility, as well as the transgender lived experiences of people who live here in Tennessee. Today I am joined in conversation with a number of really wonderful leaders in our community who specialize in a number of different spaces. And so to start our conversation off today, we are going to jump right into conversation about the current slate of hate and the legislation that is currently making its way through the Tennessee legislature currently, and what we can do to address those specific issues. So I would like to take a quick moment to introduce our 2 guests on this topic, Henry Seaton, who is with the ACLU of Tennessee, and Jace Wilder, who is with the Tennessee Equality Project. I will start with Henry if you want to give a brief introduction about yourself, and Jace, you can follow, and then we'll get into some conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Henry, like he said. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the transgender justice advocate at the ACLU of Tennessee. I'm from Sumner County originally, so I'm a born and bred Tennessean, been here most of my life. And I'm excited to kind of talk about what's going on so that people can be more aware, because we often, like, as Tennessee, we kind of skate below the level of awareness that Florida and Texas get, but we are on par with how horrible those places are getting at the moment. So I'm excited to bring some more awareness to what's going on.
My name is Jace. I am with Tennessee Equality Project. I am the governmental affairs representative and the education manager for the Trans 101 programming with Tennessee Equality Project. I also do work with GLSEN, which is a K through 12 organization as well. And I am originally from Cheatham County. So I was born and raised here, and I, got to see firsthand how some of this has folded out in schools. I'm currently finishing up at Belmont University. I'm a senior in political science, public health. Going to continue to be here at Vanderbilt, but mainly staying here, honestly, for this matter, for the fact that this legislation continues to pass. We are completely ignoring entire populations of voters by continuing to focus on this and waste taxpayer dollars and lives on this kind of legislation. So if we're going to talk about visibility, we really have to focus in on this.
Thank you both. So let's jump right into this. We have a schedule here that we're going to go through a couple different items about the trans lived experience here in Tennessee. But Henry and Jay said, we've seen each other up on the Hill a couple times this year already, and it seems like every week there's another bill that's laced with hate for the trans community that's running through the state. And so maybe between the two of you, if you could give us a brief rundown of what are some of the bills that are still sitting out there, what has happened thus far, and just kind of a brief run through of where we stand in the state. And I'll start with Henry. How about that?
Cool, sounds good. So on the ACLU perspective, we have had quite a few victories for sure. And I want to uplift that and all the work that people have done around those victories. And a lot of stumbling blocks have been in place for a lot of these bills too. So, but with that being said, the bills that we are focusing on are House Bill 2633, Senate Bill 2777. That would be our pronouns bill. So this bill would allow teachers to misgender a student on purpose if it goes against their beliefs, and not be held liable for that at all. So they would not have any sort of employment adverse action taken against them. They would not be civilly liable, and they would rather be empowered to do so. So this is kind of my main focus as the ACLU of Tennessee at the moment. So yeah, that one, we haven't seen it replicated anywhere on my end, at least. I don't know if Jace has, but this is a unique bill in that I have not seen it in another state, and we're bringing it up, and it's hard to tell why. But unlike the other healthcare bans and our higher education sports bans and all of those things, this pronouns bill is really unique to Tennessee, which I find very interesting. And then along with that, I think Jace has a little more perspective on our sports and athletics bans going on right now. So I'm going to hand it over to them.
Yeah. So thank you, Henry. We definitely also have big interest in the pronoun bill because just like he said, this really is actually the only one in the nation that exists as I'm aware of as well. And we have tracks with that I can drop links for as well, with Freedom for All Americans, who keep a really good national tab on some of this. But as of right now, it's very unique to our state. As far as the trans athlete bills, we're kind of going above and beyond trying to push the envelope on just how bad we can get. So I think that they picked up some lessons from last session where they realized that they can scapegoat or attempt to scapegoat trans women in sports by specifically making legislation that specifically targets K through 12 trans girls. leaving out trans men, because that was largely in a lot of states the argument, which was, including in the current ACLU case where, a trans boy is, saying that this is discriminating against him. Well, if we just leave out trans men, then it's fine. It's not. We still have to make space for trans girls to belong in sports as well. And this is just a harsh focus. And we've also seen this go up to the collegiate level. We've had really great testimony from Dayon, who has been up there almost every single week. She is a former athlete, and she talked a lot about how she transitioned into the female space and how she felt as though she was invading it. And instead, cis women were actually quite welcoming and told her that she did belong there, and that they continue to encourage her to get up on the podium when she did win something, and continue to tell her story, because it's a story of a woman. So we are really focusing in on this college athletics one because of the fact that it does go a step beyond what other states have also done as well, and also invades private colleges, because what it does is also says that the NCAA doesn't have the authority to make these decisions, that instead the state legislator does, and really just invades on so many other spaces that should be open conversation areas for these policies, not the state legislator.
And Jace, this is Senate Bill 2153, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that one has dramatic overreach in so many different spaces, and it is still very much one that is in committee, if I'm not mistaken, correct? So it does have to be. There's still some more steps that has to go through before it gets to the floor for a full vote. Is that correct?
Yes, it just moved through House committee. It still needs to move for the Senate, and then vice versa for the one that specifically targeted trans girls in high school. It moved through the Senate, but it still needs to move through the House. But unfortunately, we think it's going to move through the House. So,
okay. So in the chat here, I did drop a link for Freedom for All Americans, which does track currently 14 bills, I believe. Is that correct, Jace and Henry, that are making its way through currently?
For Tennessee?
Yes, for Tennessee. Yep. Yeah. And so let's talk about some of these other bills. Beyond that, we have a lot of them. There's one here, SB 0657, regarding the treatment of children and healthcare. And we'll talk a little bit more about healthcare in a little bit with some of our other guests. But let's talk about some of these other bills that are up that need to be addressed, and encourage folks to speak to their legislators about.
Would you like to start, Jace, or do you want me to start?
Either one's fine.
All right. I'll start because you spoke last. So yeah, Senate Bill 657, House Bill 578 is a healthcare ban for trans young people. So the summary from the website is that it prohibits the providing or facilitating the provision of sexual identity change to a minor who has not entered puberty. So this would be a ban on puberty blockers, for example, for our trans young people. And it also goes so far as to potentially prevent trans minors, period, end of story, to access testosterone or estrogen hormone replacement therapy. So this is especially cruel, I believe, especially when we see all of the empirical data that show that the vast majority, their complaint being that they are worried that these children will change their minds, when the reality is the vast majority of people who do end up detransitioning, is what we call it, do so because of social pressure, not because that's how they actually feel, right? And we also see, like, studies show over and over again that young people who do have access to hormones are less likely to have suicidal ideation and thoughts, have better are on track with their peers when it comes to mental health, depression, anxiety, self-esteem, whereas young people who don't have that are subject to much worse mental health outcomes. Along with that one, though, I want to celebrate a little bit. Nothing's dead. I won't say the word dead today, but we have all but stopped the worst healthcare ban, which is the Youth Health Protection Act. Jace, do you know that number off the top of your head? Because I don't remember it.
I believe it's Senate Bill 2825.
I think so too. I'm trying to remember the House Bill number. Is it House Bill 2835 and Senate Bill 2696?
Yes, yes.
All right.
We're good at this.
Yeah, we're prepared. So it's called the Youth Health Protection Act, which sounds great, right? But in reality, this is one that would completely ban any sort of gender affirming healthcare for a minor. So it is especially cruel in that it is, I mean, I don't even have the words to describe how awful this bill is, and how it just kind of blows away any sort of data that show, again, that a minor who has access to these hormones is less likely to experience suicide or suicidal ideation. And it's just like it definitely takes away from anything, like any value to a trans child's life, is kind of that goal. So there's that one. And then the other one, kind of like the sleeper in the healthcare, is the Parent Bill of Rights. And that one has completely failed due to a lack of a second in the House, which means that they didn't even hear it because no one wanted to, basically. So the Parent Bill of Rights has a number of caveats to it. Healthcare specific is that if both parents don't sign off on a minor receiving hormone replacement therapy, so let's say like you are, like your parents are divorced and you live with one, but you don't see the other, if you can't get both parents to sign off, you would need a court order to access hormone replacement therapy, which is a huge burden to put on a young person. But it also kind of reaches into pretty much every aspect of a queer or trans child's life, including access to mental health care, and education. Jace, do you want to go off about this one? This one like is especially horrendous to me. So
Yeah, this one also, so it also touches into the bucket of conversion therapy as well, because it has a specific section of it that specifies that, for that child, you would still, be allowed to bring them to a religious facility that could count towards hormone replacement therapy, like perceptions. That actually is in two of the bills. So that's in Parent Bill of Rights, and that was in the original Youth Protection Act as well. Both of them are giving that permission for conversion therapy as part of quote unquote treatment for a trans child. Alongside that, the that Parent Bill of Rights would have also allowed for the outing of a child. So for example, if a child goes into a healthcare facility, in the state of Tennessee, supposedly as a minor, you are actually supposed to be able to receive healthcare at the age of 16 without parental consent and without them having to be part of the process, because that is a protection, especially as someone at that age where you can be emancipated. That right is stripped and taken away. So that would have outed potentially for a child that did decide to pursue counseling services or healthcare services around being trans, would have been outed through that, alongside the forcing of outing through things like in education as well, which we'll talk about in a minute, probably a little bit more, which would have basically been permission for teachers to also, or not even permission, but more like enforcement for teachers to have to also tell parents, especially if that child is trying to be a part of GSAs or gender and sexuality alliances, used to be known as gay straight alliances. which again, I kind of consider almost like part of healthcare as well, because it's suicide prevention. But these bills, again, like Henry said, even for the ones like the Parent Bill of Rights that didn't get a second, it doesn't mean that we're not going to see them again. It can very easily mean that next year they bring it back, they make it worse, and they work it over, the next session, and that we can still see it come back.
I mean, what really is the crux of all of this to me is that every one of these bills is just focused on bullying, and they're bullying a very small population. And at the end of the day, these bills are bills that harm, they hurt, and they don't create a space or create opportunity for members of our trans community to thrive in the state that they live in. It's really trying to create a space where trans folks do not exist. I was specifically touched by the commentary that the Utah governor made when he vetoed didn't sign or vetoed the bill that was going through the Republican House there, or Republican legislator there, about banning trans students from playing sports. And I think what he said was so powerful in that 4 kids and only one of them is playing girls sports, right? And that's what this is all about. 4 kids who aren't dominating or winning trophies or taking scholarships. And what he says at the end here was that he doesn't necessarily understand what they're going through or why they feel the way they do, but I want them to live. And I think that's the most important piece, right? Is creating these opportunities for members of our community, no matter how they identify, an ability to thrive, an ability to live, and ability to create spaces of love at the end of the day. So one of the things I'd like to talk about too is just, and we're coming close on our time with both of you, but the general sense on the Hill, and you're navigating those halls every single day. You're in and out of these committee rooms. You're talking to legislators. What are things that individually as leaders in our own community, what can we do to help support this effort of getting these, stopping these bills in their tracks? What are some of the ways that we can be immediately involved?
I'll go first on this. So one of the things I'll go ahead and do is actually drop a link in the chat real fast. So every week, Tennessee Equality Project puts out action alerts that give you links to call your legislator, give you a script for some of them, especially the ones that are a bit more complicated or full of a lot of substance. We have easy to send emails that we also have so all you have to do is really just type in your information and it will send to the committee members or to your representatives if it's on the floor. And then as well as we have phone banks every single Monday. So every Monday we get on Zoom, we all just type in together, we're usually on mute, and we just, go through the list of everyone. And again, like this list also changes per week about what's being heard. So you'll never have to worry about basically going and finding it yourself. The other big thing that I think, honestly, having those one-on-one conversations with your representatives and senators, I think it's really easy to get in your own head and think like that they are these giants, when in reality, they work for you. You were the person that either, maybe didn't vote them into office, maybe you did vote them into office, but they represent you. They are a public servant for you. So you need to take advantage of that and request meetings, tell your story if, you identify as trans, or if you identify with being an ally of trans individuals, which if you're here, I'm assuming that it's probably one or the other. So there's that very important factor of just telling true stories, because what they are hearing is a lot of myths and a lot of basically these tall tales that aren't true. A lot of them, if you look in their bookshelves, even the ones that are trying to learn, have this one book that was really popular this last year. I always forget what it's called, but basically what it talks about is
It's irreversible damage.
irreversible damage. Almost every single one of these thank you, Henry. Almost every single one of them have this book on their bookshelf. And what it talks about is basically what we're seeing, which is the infantizing of trans men, saying that we are just women that were groomed by the internet and forced on hormones by our parents and stuff like that. And then the adultification that we're seeing in the news of trans girls, where they're made to be these grown male monsters that are uncontrollable beasts or whatever, when obviously neither narrative are true. And most of these individuals have never met a trans person or heard from someone that cares for them. So that's another great thing, alongside the phone calls, continue to contact, but most of all, also showing up if you can to the Capitol and just being in the committee room. Presence is everything, even if it's silent. If you are not able to, testify on a bill or speak on it, whether it's written testimony or spoken testimony in those committees, which again, if you're also interested in that, feel free to contact me. I'll leave my email. But if you're able to just show up and be present, it shows a lot of support, not just for just against these bills, but also for those who are having to speak on them. It gives them someone to look to whenever we're going through questioning and things like that. But yeah, there's a lot you can do.
I really appreciate you saying that, Jace. I am not I am an advocate in this community, and I've been active with a lot of different organizations, but walking up to the Hill and walking through Cordell Hall is actually not that hard. It is, I think the hardest thing is actually finding parking downtown, to be honest with you. I mean, it is literally walking in a door, going through a very standard security check, and then you're in the building. And you can have those conversations. You can talk with legislators, or you can just sit and be in silence, but just to also be present. Because like Jay said, your presence is so incredibly valuable, even if it is silence. The other thing I'll also note is that TEP has done a really wonderful job of putting together a platform on UJoin so that you can log in very easily and very quickly to a platform where you can send basically an automated email or a video to legislators. And I will tell you that how many times I've actually heard back from legislators, both Republican and Democrat, as well, who want to at least say that they've acknowledged my message. I would say that it's certainly a little different in some spaces. So I would encourage everyone to do that as well, because your voice is the most important thing that you can utilize to create change on these bills. With that, we are running a bit over. Jace, I know you have to get to a class. And so I want to thank you so much for being here. Henry, you're going to jump into conversation here in a little bit. And so Jace, thank you so much, and do well in class, I guess, right?
Yeah. Thank you guys. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you, Jace.
Hey, Jace,
All right.
it's Olivia.
Hi, Olivia.
Hi, Olivia. Welcome. All right, so we are going to shift our conversation right now over towards healthcare. And I have a couple wonderful guests with me today that are going to talk about healthcare specifically in Tennessee, and specifically trans health and the positive steps in that direction that have been taken thus far. So first off, I have Jamie Combs with me. Jamie is currently residing in Maryville, Tennessee. Jamie is a board member of Connect Us Health, and I'm so thrilled to have Jamie with us today. So great to see her. I have Dr. Schaefer with Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Dr. Schaefer just started a new office within VUMC, and I'll let him talk a little bit more about that. And then also have Mr. Delray Zimmerman, who is no stranger to many of us on this call. And we are so thankful that Delray is here. Delray leads the LGBTQI health department at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and is also working with me on some fun projects that we are hoping to roll out to our community here in the not so distant future. So Jamie, if you could give me a brief introduction about yourself outside of what I've already done, and then we'll pass off to Dr. Schaefer and then to Delray.
Well, thank you, Phil. It's good to see everyone, and thank you for holding this space for everyone. My name is Jamie Combs. I grew up in rural Tennessee, in Elizabethton, Tennessee, which is very northeast in Tennessee. Lived in the Maryville area for several years, and then I retired and moved to Nashville with my wife. During the pandemic, we moved back towards East Tennessee, at Tallahassee, Tennessee, which is in Blount County. And I was really surprised at the change as far as issues and everything in East Tennessee versus Nashville. I'd really forgotten what a struggle it was like for transgender people to receive health care. And the reason I say that is about a month ago, when my wife found a new doctor in the East Tennessee area, Maryville East Tennessee Medical Group is one of the largest healthcare providers in this particular area. She finally found a doctor that would work with her, work with her medications, and that she was pleased with. And I went with her on our last appointment, and he says, "I'm really sorry, but I don't feel like I can ethically and morally give you hormone therapy." Now, of course, this is something that he can give other cisgender women that are going through menopause. He can give younger people birth control that may be out of wedlock, or all these other scenarios. But because my wife is transgender, she cannot receive healthcare services. He did say, "I do have one other alternative." He said, "I do have a PA that works for me, and I can check with her. She's young. She'll probably be okay with it." Well, we received a call the next day that she did not feel comfortable, and this was not going to be an option for her. So now she is, again, seeking health care. But enough of that. There have been many advances in healthcare. And fortunately, I'm a board member for Connect Us Health, which is in Nashville, Priest Lake. There's 7 locations throughout the state. Most of these locations, if they're not in the Nashville hub, they are in places where people work, or large factories, that type of establishment. But they are informed consent, and they do serve marginalized communities. They serve people that are underinsured, and they serve people that are uninsured, which is very rare to find. So it's nice to know the option is there. Should anyone call the number for Connect Us Health, when it goes to recorded message, one of the first lines listed is, "Are you seeking transgender health care? Press this number." And it's one of the first things that anyone calls would hear, which is refreshing to see that people are actually not afraid to say the word transgender, and that they'll really accept anyone. The other good thing with Connect Us Health, we have several staff counselors and prescribing physicians, and they are familiar with these issues and these people, and they have no hesitation at all in trying to help their patients seek the best health care that's appropriate for them and their situation, without any kind of judgment, and making them feel comfortable and at ease, and to help them pursue their dreams and goals in life. So that's, I guess, a quick background, and I'll be glad to answer any other questions you may have.
Dr. Schaefer.
Hi, my name is Dr. Hayden Schaefer. I use he, him pronouns. I'm actually originally from Franklin, Tennessee, and did my undergraduate training at University of Tennessee, and then did med school at East Tennessee State in Johnson City, Tennessee, and then ultimately did my residency training in the University of North Carolina. So I've been mainly located in the South and Southeast, and mostly in Tennessee, and then joined Vanderbilt 2 years ago. Started doing work more in the acute care delivery because COVID had just begun at the time where I left my training. But have been delivering gender affirming care now for about 5 years. And in August, we'll be fully transitioning to a full primary care practice centered around LGBTQ+ individuals including continuation of gender affirming care here at Vanderbilt, where we strive to offer full spectrum gender affirming care to our patients and really have a really bright future in terms of what we're going to be able to offer to our patients. So currently I am offering gender affirming care through telemedicine, which I think is one of the blessings that has come out of the pandemic, is that it kind of forced insurers and providers to figure out a way how to deliver healthcare meaningfully and appropriately through a telemedicine platform. And so I have the benefit of getting to see patients from all over the state to deliver gender affirming care, not just in Nashville proper. And in fact, for example, say in Knoxville, where there was the Planned Parenthood that was subject to arson, it displaced a lot of patients who were receiving their gender affirming care there, but were able to establish with me by some partners that I have in that area. And so it's one of the beautiful parts that has come out of a terrible, terrible thing that the pandemic was been. It's sad hearing all of the legislation that we discussed just previously, especially focused around the care of minors. I think what's striking to me and juxtaposed against the COVID-19 pandemic is how often I would hear, your decision to be vaccinated for COVID-19 it's a discussion between you and your doctor, and you and your provider, you will make the best decision for your health with that person. And then this conversation around restricting what happens in an exam room in the care of a patient is completely contradictory. They're saying, no, you and your doctor can't actually figure out what's best for you and your child. And so we're going to step in and tell you what is going to be appropriate. And so it's completely, it's asinine, and it's incredibly frustrating to see what is already a marginalized and health averse risk group get further marginalized when most of the people who are making these laws have not actually met or know a transgender individual. And so very tragic to think about that, especially coming out of this pandemic. The number of patients that I see who make a telemedicine appointment with me on their 18th birthday, sitting in their room so that their parents can't hear them have this appointment, is astounding. It's at least 2 or 3 patients per session who are having to do this in secret for fear of being retaliated. And it's just absolutely tragic the way that things are moving legislatively to further prohibit this care. That said, amongst all of this sadness that has occurred, I'm so excited for some of the new opportunities that we're going to have here at Vanderbilt to continue to care for these patients. And I'm happy to ask any questions about kind of what our practice looks like, what my practice looks like.
Thank you, and Delray.
Thank you so much. I'm super proud to share space with my good friend Jamie and Dr. Schaefer this morning. So I'm Delray Zimmerman. I direct the Vanderbilt Program for LGBTQ Health. We actually, the program I run is non-clinical. We are focused on provider education, understanding that the previous generations of providers did not get appropriate training in the provision of healthcare resources for sexual and gender minorities. So I'm really, really focused on that. And I think an important thing that I want to announce here that a lot of people are still not aware of, we provide patient navigation services. And so if you're in the LGBTQ community, and especially if you are transgender and you are seeking healthcare resources and you don't know where to go, we can help take that guesswork out for you. Our program exists to connect people to healthcare resources, whether it's at Vanderbilt or not. We're glad to see people at Vanderbilt, certainly, and I'll talk a little bit more about our comprehensive services here. But certainly, partners like Connect Us Health are very, very important. We send a lot of patients over to Connectus Health as well, because it's a better fit for the insurance, or if patients are underinsured or uninsured as well. And over the years, we have certainly highlighted and pushed the envelope on clinical care for LGBTQ patients. We've launched 2 clinics for trans health, one on the adult side, one on the pediatric side. And then in 2019, we launched a complete scope of gender affirming surgical services. And so we are trying to be a more one-stop shop for gender affirming care, understanding that there is just a desert here in the Southeast, and we're seeing patients from all over the region, and are actually starting to see patients from from other regions of the country as well. And as Dr. Schaefer alluded to, over the coming months, we will actually be adding some wraparound services. We're going to launch some initiatives in behavioral health and social work. We're now actively recruiting an electrologist to be able to provide electrolysis services on site, and just to get it a lot more services under one umbrella. So you will see an evolution in the care that we're able to provide over the next couple of years. So happy to talk more, but I want to leave opportunities for further discussion and additional questions.
Thank you, Delray. So I think one of the things that is really important, and it kind of feeds back into the conversation that we were having earlier around the political space here in Tennessee, is that access to gender affirming healthcare was a challenge before the pandemic. It is a challenge after the pandemic. And then you have legislators that are trying to erase trans existence, not only here in Tennessee, but throughout the country and in many different states. When we're talking about healthcare, there are so many elements to that we need to discuss. Mental health care is one of the critical pieces, right? I just read a recent survey that shows that 64% of transgender individuals reported having to postpone or cancel transition-related medical appointments and care during the pandemic. That 50% had to postpone or cancel transition surgery due to COVID, which has only been exacerbated over the last 2 years, and that nearly 40% have attempted suicide during the pandemic. And so these are all issues that are so critical to our community and to the trans community specifically. I mean, trans healthcare is a human right. And so I want to speak a little bit to Jamie and your experience with Connect Us, Dr. Schaefer and your experience. Where are the biggest challenges that we are facing as a community, as a trans community? What are some of the biggest challenges that are being experienced by members of the community in terms of trying to procure or secure care? And where are some of the biggest challenges that we're facing that we can draw awareness to?
This is a little off topic, but I think just our general biases, our general the rhetoric around these issues, and there's so much shame still involved in these issues in 2022 that makes it more resistant, or people more resistant or hesitant to seek care, or feel even just feeling less worthy of proper health care, or even being able to identify proper health care. And again, it's still a challenge, especially in rural areas, to find someone that will treat you. I waited probably about 3 years before I began treatment, and I didn't even know if that would be an option for me. And in a lot of your rural areas, and a lot of times, your insurance will dictate who you can see. So there's so many factors there and limitations that prevent us from getting health care. And there's so many different levels of health care where you may be able to do hormone therapy, but then that's the extent of the healthcare provider. So there's no general standardized form or standardized, I guess, limitations or procedures that we can do?
I would say the limitations certainly will always come across with cost and how insurance companies view this and the variability that has on somebody's care. There are certain insurers in the state that will not cover your visit with me for transgender care if I code a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, but will be covered under a diagnosis of endocrine disorder not otherwise specified. It's completely arbitrary, but it is intentionally prohibitive to those patients. I'd also say, for example, I've had patients who have to change careers so that they can get to a reliable insurer so that they can get their gender affirming care. Amazon's healthcare for their workers is fairly all-inclusive for gender affirming care. And I've had people who have master's degrees in education who leave their wonderful job just to go and work in a warehouse. And not that that's a bad job, but certainly not what their training was for. And so I would say advocacy on the standpoint of ensuring standardization for access to care for transgender individuals from all insurers in the state of Tennessee is a big thing that helps them. Otherwise, not everyone who is going to seek, say, for example, the most expensive interventions in transgender care, which would be surgical interventions, how many GoFundMes, does every person have to feel like they need to do just to get the care that they deserve to make them and help them be the person that they are? It's very tragic. So continuing advocacy on that front is super, super important. The other prohibitive factors that I see to this is thinking about all of the touch points that are not just the doctor's office that somebody has to get to get their care. So for example, I keep a black book of pharmacies in our area. When a patient complains to me that a pharmacist at a certain Walgreens or wherever gave them flack for being gender non-conforming and belittled them or was intentionally dismissive of their prescriptions or gave them too much of a hard time, a place is just to avoid. And so thinking about, as a healthcare provider myself, I'm just one touch point in somebody's healthcare delivery, right? If my patient is misgendered at the front desk, that already sets the precedent that this is not an affirming or a safe space. So extending safe space education to all touch points in healthcare is really important.
And if I can chime in a little bit here too, we're actually working on a health equity initiative right now. We got some grant funding to create training toolkits to actually expand our network of providers, specifically in rural areas. So that's something that we're working on right now, and we'll be offering later this summer. And and I think one of the great evolutions is that where the provision of hormone therapy, which is which certainly is a standard of care for those who want to intersect with medicine around their transition. You historically has lived in the field of endocrinology, and like Dr. Schaefer, it has now moved into the primary care space, and that's a wonderful thing. And so we want to teach more primary care providers just how to administer hormone therapy, to understand that they can actually do it, and it no longer requires in endocrinology specialty. That's really important as well.
And one thing to piggyback on that, Phil, or Delray, I think we just need better education in general for all healthcare providers, because I go to the doctor, when was your last period? They've got this information in front of them, and if this just happened one time or an isolated time, I would just brush it off and not think anything. But this is a constant, anytime there's an ER visit, anytime a new doctor, a new nurse, and it's constantly, people are not looking at the medical chart or something as basic as that of the patient they're serving.
We're actually transforming our electronic health records because some of those things that come up for providers and staff members are pop-up questions, right? That are populated based on demographic information in your chart. Well, we've not done a great job as of yet being able to identify trans patients, but we've been in a longitudinal process so that moving forward later this year, as a matter of fact, we'll be introducing new concepts in the EHR. So we'll have the ability to capture a patient's sex assigned at birth, their legal sex, as well as their patient stated gender identity. And that will actually be the hero field that our clinical leaders will see when patients come to visit. It will also help us better document the experiences of transgender patients so that we can track them over time. In addition to that, not only are we going to be capturing that data, we're going to move to where we can capture chosen names as well as legal names. For instance, I use my first and middle name when I check into a healthcare appointment. I'd prefer to be called Delray and not just Del. That makes me feel 5 years old. This is going to be great for me, but it's absolutely critical for our trans patients who may not have yet gone through a legal name change. So subtle things like that make a huge difference. And it's taken us about 4 years just to move in that direction. I'm glad we're finally seeing movement, but those systems are hard to change.
Some really insightful conversation. So thank you all so much for sharing. I dropped a few links in the chat from the National Center for Transgender Equality that speaks specifically to transgender healthcare and especially surgical care for members of our trans community. And I want to highlight one important thing that they say here is that the most important thing to remember is that your insurance should cover transition-related care. However, you may need to show your insurance company why the treatment that you need is medically necessary for you with letters from your healthcare providers. If you are denied coverage or if your plan has an exclusion, you may need to explain to your insurance company or employer why it is a legal discrimination to exclude medically necessary transition-related care. And so there's some specific details within those links, and feel free to take some more time to study those. And Delray just did drop here in the chat that their phone number as well as an email address for referrals and healthcare navigation through VUMC is also a really important and helpful resource. Is there any last thoughts on healthcare before we move over to our next round of discussion?
I would love to just jump in here real quick, just for half a second, Phil, and say, if you listen to everything that was just spoken and all the amazing leaps and bounds that VUMC has taken, I want you to look at this amazing person on the screen named Delray, and he is the root of every single bit of that hard work and effort. And I just want to say thank you. It's just amazing to be in space with you.
Oh my gosh, Olivia, wow, that means the world to me. Thank you so much. It's a privilege of a lifetime to be doing this work. There are a lot of people here doing an amazing work, but I appreciate the shout out. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for being part of this conversation. Jamie, you're going to move into our next conversation with Henry and Olivia. Dr. Schaefer, Delray, thank you so much. Feel free to stay on if you want to continue in conversation with us, but very much appreciate you being with us today.
And I'll just give one last plug. In August, I will be starting, like I mentioned, I will be continuing gender affirming care and more focus on LGBTQ plus primary care with a fully expanded panel, a mix of telemedicine and in person. So if you or anyone you know is looking for a resource, I am looking to fill up a new empty panel. And so would love to see anyone.
Great. Thank you so much. That's great information. If you can drop your contact info, Dr. Schaefer, in the chat here, and we'll make sure that it gets distributed out. All right. So where I want to bring our conversation next is a really fascinating topic around specifically around the experiences of trans folks in our trans community from years ago to today, and where it has come from. Now, I'm not going to sit here and call anyone old, because we all are beautiful people and we all have really unique and special lived experiences. But I think because, there are folks in our community who have really navigated life as a trans person before it was popular or common or a bigger conversation. Popular is a terrible word, and so please strike that from the record. But something that was more discussed publicly and whatnot. I want to talk a little bit about those lived experiences. And so joining in that conversation today, Jamie from Connect Us Health. We're back with Henry from ACLU. And then I'm also so excited to have Olivia Hill joining us. Olivia is a dear friend of mine, is an activist in this community for trans community and trans existence. And so I'm so thrilled to have her with us as well. And so Olivia, since Henry and Jamie have done a brief introduction already, could you please do an introduction about yourself and some of the things that you're working on?
Well, my name is Olivia Hill. I kind of call myself an accidental activist. I didn't really plan on this. It just kind of happened. I just retired from a 26-year career at Vanderbilt University. I used to run the power plant over on the university side. The university side and the medical center are two separate places. The medical center is amazing, and they have been just amazing to me. But since I transitioned and since my time is no longer at Vanderbilt, I've spent a lot of time just standing up and fighting for people that need to be, stood up for. I've also started writing a book. Hope to have it to the publisher by the first or second week of January. It just basically goes through my story and my journey, everything I've been through to get to where I'm at here. So thank you for this time and space.
Thank you, Olivia. So Jamie, I want to bring you into the conversation and talk about your lived experience as a member of this community over the last few years. You've been active in Tennessee and in Nashville for a number of years. I think I've known you at least for 9 or 10 at this point, which is crazy. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about what the trans experience was like when you were growing up, when you transitioned, and tell us a little bit about the history and what that experience was like in here in Tennessee.
As far as my personal experience, there was no representation. So I could not see anyone like me. And I grew up in rural Tennessee, and this is something, we didn't have the terminology for transgender or transgender issues. We didn't have the information, and we also had similar to legislation. Now we had so much rhetoric and so much misinformation about a certain community of people. So that made it very, very difficult. I transitioned in '97, but I began to pursue transition in '94. It took that long to find a healthcare provider to help me, medically transition, which was necessary. I feel like at that particular time in Elizabeth and Tennessee, had I transitioned there at that time, I do not feel like I feel like I would have been killed. And I think that's pretty honest assessment of the situation. I've been very fortunate. I'm fortunate that I have some privilege that has allowed me to live my life and be open. My employer is as an affirming employer, but at the same time, I can be comfortable in my own skin. I can walk down the street and not be called out. And I remember when that wasn't always the case. And I know people that have not been able to do that and not had the same freedoms or the enjoyment of life that I have. It's still a struggle, healthcare to today, especially when we see legislation that would prohibit healthcare for teenagers or younger people, when insurance companies have more of a right to refuse care, when there are so many great advances we have, particularly with Vanderbilt healthcare. But myself personally, I don't want to discuss health-related issues. I do need a follow-up surgery from my original surgery. It's been a year and a half. Is there a doctor in the state that can do that? It's looking like it's not probable, although there's a surgeon at Vanderbilt that was in the training for this. But as of yet, and with the pandemic and the slowdown, she's not been able to receive that training to perform the surgery. So New York would probably be my closest, my best chance. But again, you're talking the travel and the expense. And I'm fortunate that I will be able to pursue this. I don't know the exact time, but I can pursue this because I have just a certain amount of privilege. I have the income of my wife, and I'm able to have the time necessary available. And most of my community does not have that. So I'll always be grateful and appreciative. And it seems like, particularly now in this area, when we seem to make so many advances, it seems like there's still so many microaggressions, particularly with the sports, because that constantly becomes a talking point. And I don't know of a transgender person that's not heard from another person or overheard in conversation. I don't want a son on the swim team with my daughter, or competing against sports with my daughter. So this false narrative gets painted, particularly in rural areas. And it was a rude awakening coming back to East Tennessee from Nashville.
That's interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. I think it's interesting too I want to bring Henry into this conversation, because while there has been quite a bit of these microaggressions and this hateful legislation that we've seen, there's also been a very broad acceptance within certain communities, specifically with younger adults, and specifically within the LGBT population, the LGB population, I should say, or LGBTQ population, where there's been more acceptance and more willingness to stand up and fight for our trans community. And so maybe from a young person's perspective, Henry, where is that changed? Where have you seen more acceptance in your lived experience?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, because I think, because I grew up in Sumner County and Hendersonville, I didn't see that acceptance everywhere, but I still had it, which is already pretty huge. With that being said, for the most part, I had to travel to Nashville and engage with Just Us at the Oasis Center to kind of get that acceptance that I needed. But it was still when I said that I was transgender, it wasn't a question of what is that? People had opinions on it, but people and they were wrong opinions for the most part, but they at least kind of knew that word, right? They knew what it meant, even if they thought it meant something horrible. So kind of that recognition of the existence of transness is kind of where I see the main difference. But it's hard to say where I've experienced acceptance that's new. You know what I mean? I only have an experience as a young person. I haven't watched it evolve over time as other people have. I came out as trans the summer between my sophomore and junior year of high school. So that would have been 2014. And then I started hormone replacement therapy about a year after that. So this is a hard question. I'm trying to think of a specific thing that would answer this perfectly, but I can't, just because that changes over time. And I know from statistics that I've seen, over half of Gen Z people know someone that is trans or uses a gender neutral pronoun. So that's huge. Like that's a very different. We see a generation coming up that like it's not even a question anymore for the most part. Like that acceptance is kind of pretty wide. And I'm grateful that I came out when I did and that I got the chance to like, even if it wasn't like a ton of acceptance, I got acceptance like every step of the way. Even if it was just one person in a group of 1,000, I still had that every step of the way. So with the broader acceptance also comes like the more I wouldn't say more vocal hatred, but it's definitely like it's gaining a lot of momentum because people feel like with that acceptance becoming more popular, they feel like it's a new issue that just came up, right? So the acceptance and like the virility of the opposition kind of come hand in hand. So it's hard to balance. It's become a really polarizing topic. Not that it wasn't before, but now it's like on the national stage as like this very, very polarizing topic. And Jamie and Olivia, feel free to correct me when I'm wrong, of course, but it's like it's really hard to see that kind of happen, to see like my body be a point of like this very contentious debate, right? Like it is like who I am that is so controversial that politicians are running on the idea that they want to oppress me to the point that I kill myself. Like that's just where it's at. So I think like even though it's becoming more broadly accepted, it's still hard and it's still not perfect. So it's really hard to kind of like put like my finger on like whether it's better or worse than it was. But sorry, that was kind of everywhere. It's been a long week for me, so you'll have to forgive me.
No, thank you. Thank you. I think it provides a really unique understanding and this very clear dichotomy between the lived experiences, even in just a 25-year time frame. And from Jamie having the experience of not being able to find a doctor in the 90s to today, where you can walk into a doctor's office where you know that you're accepted. And I think that shows a very a very beautiful transition, but it also shows that there's so much more awareness that members of our community need to step up and share and live into.
But
Olivia,
one thing on that, if I can interject, I do not feel like a lot of members of my community can clearly find out which doctor they can see. I don't, especially in rural areas, I don't think it's easy to find a physician for a lot of people. That I still today, I don't think that's their life experience in the healthcare.
You're right. And I'm thank you for correcting me, because there's also a very vast difference between the lived experience of someone who is in a closer metropolitan area versus someone who lives in a more rural community. For sure. And there are great organizations that are popping up around the country that do telehealth and will deliver medicine and provide some semblance of care, but it's still a much heavier lift in many cases for members of different communities. So thank you for correcting me on that, Jamie. Olivia, I want to bring you into this conversation and talk about your experiences. I think that there's a really unique, in our previous conversations where you've been in this space with us with the Center for Nonprofit Management, you've talked specifically about privilege and how that has changed in your life over time. And so I would love to hear from you and talk a little bit about that experience a little bit, if you don't mind.
Thanks. I guess the real short version of my story is I really felt like me growing up. I mean, I wore dresses at home. I pretended with makeup and curled my hair. I had an easy bake oven. And I honestly just felt like me growing up until I was at age 10. And I wanted to start doing this at school and outside. And my folks realized it wasn't just a little phase. And so I went to a psychiatrist for 2 years to teach me that I had to like boy things and that I was a boy and I had to pretend like a boy and I couldn't like girl things anymore. And that started this whole thing of me pretending. And I pretended for so long that once I became 20, I thought, you know what? Military could fix me because I feel broken because that doctor told me that I'm a boy and I have to be a boy, but I really feel like a girl on the inside. So I must be broken. So I can go in the Navy and they can fix me. And about halfway, about 4 or 5 years into my career in the Navy, you know, you hear the old story that you tell a lie so long, you really start to believe it. And I start to believe that I'm me. Okay, I'm doing this. These people really believe that I'm a guy. I still kind of feel like me on the inside, but these people really believe me and I'm really doing this. And so I'm living my life. I did 10 years in the Navy. I was in the Desert Storm. I'm a combat vet. And I got out of the Navy and I went to work at Vanderbilt and I did the same thing at Vanderbilt I did in the Navy, which is make steam electricity power plant. And so I'm going through life and I'm living as this person. And in 2017, I decided to come out as me. And as I started to transition and I started to go, one of the very first things that completely and totally rung my bell was the loss of my male privilege that I never had any idea that I had. And it literally shook me to my core about how I had seen everything else in life, from privilege of every kind of way and racism and everything. And it really started me looking at a whole lot of different things. And so I started really trying to stand up and fight for everybody. So many people see men and women as this great big huge Grand Canyon divide, and there really is not. We all know tall cisgender women and short cisgender men. So size is just size. The other difference is hormones. And so I spend a great part of my time telling people that with my transition, I mean, the very first thing that went was upper body strength. And then I started losing muscle mass throughout my whole body. I lost red blood cell count. I lost lung capacity. I shrunk about an inch, almost an inch and a half, because the vertebrae are different sizes. And so many things about my body changed that it really upsets me when people say about a swimmer that's unfair advantage because she's taller. That's all it is height, because she doesn't. I assure you, that was the very first thing that happened to me was my upper body strength. By month 3, it was gone. And so the other big thing I think a lot of it are the same ways is we're kind of fighting 2 fights. One, we're trans and we're trying to stand up for ourselves and trying to get health care and trying to do all these things. And at the same time, we're fighting sexism because we've had privilege enough to be passable. And so now we're fully accepted on the other side. And so now I'm blonde with larger sized breasts. And so now I'm extra stupid. You know, and the only way for me to correct anybody that is I have to out myself. And so like so many women, we have the choice of, oh, thank you, honey. I would have never known that had you not told me. Or, you know, that's bullshit. That's not true. It's not correct. And then all of a sudden you've labeled yourself. People are not going to work with you. If this is an employee or career person, they're not going to work with you anymore. And they're not going to extend anything. So I spend as much of my time as I can trying to educate people about gender, how we're all very similar. And the thing that nobody talks about in transition is once you kind of get there, how do you deal with all the sexism? Because it's there as much as anything else.
Really interesting and salient points there, Olivia. Thank you. This is a hard conversation. And I think that, it's even as the host and the moderator of these conversations, I find myself to put in these places where I may not necessarily say the right words, or I may not necessarily engage in the right type of conversation. And truthfully, it is incumbent upon all of us as people in the community to fight for our trans and non-binary people and continue to learn and fight for their visibility and help share their stories, so that we can ensure that they live in a manner that is equitable. And so I thank you so much for sharing these experiences, because they are truly they're truly life-giving in a lot of ways to me, and I'm certainly sure to our attendees as well. Jamie, I would love for you to talk a little bit about where we are, where you feel the greatest need and change has to come for our trans community, and where on this day of visibility and this promoting visibility for our trans community, what is the biggest change that you wish to see in the next year? And then I'm going to ask the same question to Henry and Olivia, and we'll take a few moments for questions before we move into our next section.
I don't think a lot of change will occur until we see a lot more visibility and representation. I think there's so many talented people. There's so much talent and art and skill and expertise in the trans community. And until that gets seen and spotlighted, I think the changes are going to be slow, because the rest of the time it seems like our legislators are trying to rally their troops together, or get the more conservative troops together, and they are really further spreading rhetoric and painting a false narrative of us. The transgender community also, I know Olivia mentioned sexism and experienced that as a female, but we also, there's a big divide with the TERFs, trans exclusive radical feminist. There's still a lot of friction there, and a lot of harm is coming from that community. That's all you can say. And one thing, I feel comfortable in my own skin, and I have, but I can say, well, I'm 53. I've really never felt safe. And I almost want to ask Henry, as a young person, do you really feel safe in your own skin today? What I'd like to know your perception on that.
I think it's like a little different, right? Because I'm masculine. I'm a trans man. And there's definitely points, especially living in Tennessee, where I'm like, oh, like I don't feel safe, especially being like a public trans voice. I feel like when I go out anywhere in Hendersonville, which is where I'm from, I'm at risk of being like noticed by somebody. I've gotten hate mail. In high school, I got 2 death threats. So there was definitely a time when I felt unsafe, and that still happens every now and then. I don't ever like 100% of the time feel safe. But I think it's a different narrative when I'm a trans man, meaning I'm much more often seen as the victim rather than a predator like trans feminine and trans women are. I'm not seen as someone who will go in and like hurt your women and girls, right? I'm seen as like a woman who was misled by these communities. So it's not that that kind of safety is not quite as it's different. It's a different type of like safety threat, especially when we look at the records and see that trans women, specifically Black trans women, are murdered at unprecedented rates. And of course, trans men fit into that scenario, and non-binary people as well. But like the target is not as large on my back as it is on trans women, specifically trans women of color. So
I'd like to jump in and say, and echo what Jamie said. It wasn't until I transitioned. I never worried about anything. Walking out of a bar at 3 o'clock in the morning and walking to my car. It was never an issue until I transitioned. And now I don't feel safe anywhere I go. I'm all the time, have my keys out, I'm ready to go, I'm watching my surroundings. I've been approached a few times. And so I echo what Jamie said. I don't really feel safe anymore. And that's just since I transitioned.
Henry, I want to thank you for calling attention to our BIPOC trans community. I think that that is such an important topic that ties into Trans Day of Visibility, most importantly. And that, you know, just in 2021, we had 50 tracked murders of Black and Indigenous and people of color, persons of color, trans community people, members. It came out really terribly. And so it is just that was 50 that we were able to track according to the Human Rights Campaign. Just this year alone, we've already tracked 6, and there are certainly more than that. Just 2 days ago, 2 transgender women were murdered in Chicago, as well as a 19-year-old trans woman was murdered by her father. So, I mean, this is something that continues to happen, and something that we need to be aware of and continue to fight and support our BIPOC community, specifically our BIPOC trans community. Thank you.
I think one of the ways to help change this too is our legislation. When we really say as a society, this is unacceptable to kill people, particularly people that are trans, because traditionally, when there's an assault against a trans person, the victim is really kind of held responsible in a lot of people's views, and the laws are different. I had a friend who was murdered, and she was going to leave her boyfriend, and he shot her. Another thing to point out, crimes against transgender people are almost always disfiguring, dismemberment, disbodymemberment, disfiguring. And basically he ended up with a slap on the wrist and a house arrest. So we see, until we start to see, I think, crimes and people prosecuted that commit these crimes, I think that we'll be taken less seriously, or the crimes against us will be taken less seriously.
Yeah, I think Jamie nailed that right on the head. And until we start having some really big things happen, and we have some representation of trans folks, and then some real consequences happen to somebody who did harmful anything to a trans person is made public. Because some of us in the room are old enough to remember civil rights, and how once that was passed, it was not true really in the South. And even though it was a law, it was not really in the South out loud. You just couldn't say it out loud until the mid 70s. And I feel like there's some things that's changed over the last few years, but in the South, we're still looked at as just horrible people.
Hey, Phil, you're muted.
Of course I am. Thank you. Part of this also is really driving awareness to the Equality Act and encouraging our national legislators to work and fight to pass the Equality Act, specifically in the Senate. That Equality Act would prevent states like Tennessee from denying LGBTQ plus Americans the basic freedoms to live and thrive in this country. And while it's not the most perfect legislation, it makes positive steps in the right direction, and can address some of the things that our community truly needs in order to thrive. And so that's something that, in addition to the resources that we've shared earlier, is also something that everyone needs to be aware of and encourage people to be engaged on. And so with that, I'm going to take a few minutes, and I just want to let, if there's anybody who has questions that want to chime in and add a question here. We have about 2 or 3 minutes for questions, or if there's any other additional thoughts that we want to add before we transition into our next exciting topic.
I just want to jump in here and say what an honor it is to be sitting in the room with some super awesome and amazing trans folks, especially Jamie, because I remember when I really started my journey, almost everybody I talked to is like, you talked to Jamie yet? You talked to Jamie? That's who you need to talk to. She can really give you some direction. And I'm trying to think, we were at a meeting at my house the very first time I saw her, and I thought, y'all told me she was trans. She's not trans, that's a woman. I honestly thought, you're just amazing. I've heard so many great, amazing things about you in the very little bit of time I've had to work with you. I just want to say it's an honor to be with you, or in your presence.
Well, I feel the same, and we will see you more in 22. Okay. And I look forward to that. Thank you for the kind words.
All right. Well, like I shared earlier, there will be so much that we share as a follow-up in an email that goes out to all of those who attended and RSVP'd to this conversation. Jamie, Henry, Olivia, thank you so very much for being with us today and sharing your lived experiences, sharing your work, sharing your time with all of us. And so it's certainly very much appreciative. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to transition now to another exciting topic for the last 20 or so minutes that we are together. And I want to welcome my friend, Dr. Robin Henderson Espinoza. Dr. Robin is, we are going to be talking today about their new book, Body Becoming: A Path to Our Liberation. I am so excited to have a few minutes to discuss this book with Dr. Robin, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Robin to our conversation today.
Thank you so much.
So just the title alone of this book is like boom, 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 boom. And we've had so many conversations around becoming as just humans.
Yeah.
You and we've also had conversation here in this space around becoming with the Center for Nonprofit Management. And so let's start with the very simple things. Let's talk about the title and how you got there and some of that experience.
Yeah. Well, I initially wanted to call the book Becoming Embodied. And the book is really about my own sort of story of coming into myself as a trans person, as a Latinx, as a person living on the autism spectrum, and how that can shape our relationships. And the publisher felt like Becoming Embodied was too academic, and so they chose Body Becoming. And I actually think it's a better title than what I proposed, because it does get to the core of what we were talking about. And, becoming is a much longer tradition than the Michelle Obama book that came out a couple years ago. Becoming has been with us for a long time, but we don't often articulate our processes of becoming, especially as trans people, largely for the things that have already been said, and the surveillance culture, the just the disparity around access. We don't have shared stories. And I would love for Tennessee to start an oral history project around collecting trans stories, so that we have an archive, so that we have stories to share with our young people and our communities. But the book really is suggesting that trans embodiment is a vision for democracy, and we know that trans embodiment is under duress right now in states like Tennessee, Texas, and Florida, especially when it comes to our young people, and the parents of those young people. I mean, and my native state is Texas, and so watching the regressive policies and politics surrounding trans young people and the parents, how it could be a federal crime to care for your kid. There's something wrong with that. But really, the book is pointing toward this utopia of a trans future, that trans people embody something that we can learn from as a democratic society, and that trans people can bring about a democratic justice. And so I hope that it gives visibility to trans folks, and that we begin to pay attention to our stories as one strategy for democratic justice. I see my brother here, Timothy Hughes, and it takes a diversity of tactics to bring about democratic justice. And so how can we piece together our stories in a way that privileges difference and advances difference and accelerates difference to bring about democratic justice? And the book is politicized narrative and politics, and I hope it does something in the world.
There's no doubt that it will, truthfully. I mean, I've read this probably cover to cover twice already. The ideas that you share in here are so incredibly powerful, whether you're of the trans experience or not. And I think that is what is so beautiful about your writing and what you share here. I was specifically touched in I think it was like your second chapter about what is body, or what is the body, and you specifically coming into relationship with your body, and that process of being with your identity, and how you can be your own best friend. Because I think that when we're looking at experience when we're looking at our lived experiences from what's happening internally to also what's happening externally, like what's happening in our world, but then what we are feeling inside, there are really dramatic differences sometimes. But at the same time, how can we use our bodies to truly live into our identities?
Right.
And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about this, because there's so much richness in this specific chapter. That's I think your second chapter, if I'm not mistaken. Right. So if you could talk a little bit about that, and then just the idea of bodies.
Well, I think that we have become machines in this world, instead of what I like to think of as like fleshly sociosensory material. We have feelings, we experience sometimes joy and pain at the same time, and yet we are conscripted into a society that makes us into robots, punching a clock, time in, time out, or what have you. And I just want to recover bodies as they're sacred beings. We have divinity inside of us. In fact, one of the things that has been written out of many traditions, but my tradition is a Christian tradition, is the divinity of people, and a longstanding doctrine within Christianity is that God became human so that humans could become divine. It's called theosis. And we don't talk about that. We don't talk about our own inherent dignity, our own inherent divinity. And so, part of my tactic here is to talk about what really are bodies. Bodies are constructed. Bodies sometimes are labeled a certain way by existing hierarchies that actually cause oppression. And what happens when we feel differently, are we empowered by ourselves and those around us to live into that reality? I think about my own Mexican mother and the process of migration over centuries, from Mexico to the United States, and how those bodies get conscripted into supremacy culture. I think a lot about Black bodies get conscripted into supremacy culture. And I'm all for emptying prisons and legalizing cannabis and all that, because bodies matter. And we shouldn't have bodies siloed in profit earning prisons. We should have bodies in community, and we should be endeavoring to create more sustainable communities through relationships and through the visibility of different bodies, differently abled bodies, differently structured bodies, etc. And we've lost that. We're tied to the machinery of things like capitalism and institutional bullshit. And I want us to recover community as a way to rethink bodies.
That's leaving me with a lot of different questions that I want to pose in so many different ways.
Yeah.
But we are limited on the amount of time that we have, and so I want to pull a thread on something that you specifically talked about with being with your disability or being differently abled, right? And so you make it very clear in the book here, with your struggles of autism, and what that experience is like. And I think when we're looking at it when we're looking at community at large, right, from a space of just the LGBTQ plus community, right? When we're looking at that community, the one thing that we always we sometimes fail to bring in are those secondary identities that fall into the community, right? Whether it's Latinx or being differently abled or suffering from something that's unseen.
Right.
And I would love for you to talk about how sort of that secondary identity in some cases, or sometimes the first identity of a disability, kind of plays into the role of impacting the experience of LGBTQ people.
Yeah,
learned in your writing.
Yeah, disability and living with experiences of mental health, we often discard it, largely because we live in an ableist world. But could we create a more hospitable community if we tended to the things that we often silence or ignore as a primary feature of community? A lot of us live with things like anxiety and depression and how that shapes our identity. What happens when we create a more hospitable place for our anxieties and depression, or what have you? How can we create better community when we pay attention to the layers of our identity that we build? I think a lot about how I am overwhelmed with crowds, and yet I am often in the public square doing my work. And so I have to take care of myself. I have to get enough rest. I have to be by myself enough. And thankfully, I have a support structure that creates conditions for that. But what if we built community with those kind of structures in place? You know, what if we put care, an ethic of care, at the center of our community building practices? How would that shape and shift our community engagement? I think a lot about, my table is open. Olivia has been at my table before, and I much prefer just sharing a meal with people, because that is how we build community. And so how do we create conditions for better relationships to be built in light of what we bring to the table? For me, it's deep introversion, anxiety, and autism. And for other people, it could be what have you. But can we pay attention to those things in our community building processes?
So what are some tips on how to build community among our among our differences, through our differences?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that heterogeneity or differences actually creates our flourishing. So something like a cosmopolitan community is actually better. We know through history that homogenizing communities is actually death bringing. And I think about people so much who are living in cultures that are flattening out differences. There is limited flourishing. I go back very simple to the ancient practice of eating together. Can we share meals together? Can we bring our differences to the table? My brother Timothy and I were just in a workshop together last week where I spent a lot of time about food and eating together. And I can't wait to share a meal with Timothy and his family. But I think that is part of what we can do together. Is let's return to these simple practices of sharing a meal together. Can we do that? Bring all of our differences together. Can we have a picnic together when it gets warmer? How can that establish community practices? But largely we need to practice being together. We don't know. Really, we don't know how to be human together anymore. We've lost so much. There's so much grief. There's so much lament. There's so much pain. There's so much violence. Can we be human together? And I need to say that there is also a lot of sort of internalized violence within the LGBTQ community that bubbles up as domestic violence against trans people. And we need to figure out as a community, how do we address these internal issues so that we can thrive and flourish as a community? And I think if we can bring our difference together, practice accountability in relationship, learn how to breathe together, and expand our curiosities, we build better community.
I'm going to just sit with that for a second, because it was so deep, right? I think that needs to just kind of echo in the space that we're in right now. I love what Timothy said in the chat, is that when we share space, we can share understanding. And when and with shared understanding, we have the ability to transform. I added a few words, Timothy.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful idea, and it resonates along with what you're talking about here specifically, Robin.
Yeah.
So I love further on in the book here, there's a section, a chapter around your journey to becoming embodied.
Yeah.
And the idea around embodiment, like you said at the very beginning, may not necessarily hit with some people. And so could you talk maybe through a little bit of your story and how you got to this space of embodiment? And and really leaning in, fully touching into to the person that you are?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's an ongoing journey. I'm still becoming, I'm still in process, but basically in 2015, after I finished my PhD, I walked into my therapist's office and said, I don't want to know anything about you. I just want to have a relationship with my body. Because I had been living life from the shoulders up, and I was with a partner at the time who didn't affirm me as trans because at the time I wasn't on testosterone. And my partner at the time said, "You're not trans. You're not a man." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not trying to be a man. I'm in this in between space." Obviously, moving to Nashville and finding a care provider with Shane Taylor and getting on HRT has really transformed my life. But it was really that question to my therapist: how do I have a relationship with my body? And so we began breathing together every week. I began journaling every day. I began trying to be my best friend. And that's ongoing. I'm still in process with that. But I think I love myself more because I risked that question with my therapist. And obviously the people in my life, my current partner and other folks who are helping me get into my body, one of the things is I can't feel unless someone is touching me or hugging me. And it's just part of the feature of being on the autism spectrum. So we do a lot of self holds. We do a lot of kind of putting my feet on the ground, and this whole becoming embodied is an embodiment in general. It has its own sort of terrain, right? There's things like yoga that you can do. You can go running to be embodied. And for me, I need something very basic, and I need someone to guide me. So I have a yoga coach who guides me through sort of a meditative process of getting into my body. And I am very much at the beginning. I'm not advanced, but I know people who can help you. I mean, I really just wanted to share in the book that we can heal ourselves if we give ourselves a chance to become our own best friend, which is really hard for trans people because we've hated ourselves for so long. But I look at Olivia and I'm like, you're beautiful and I love you. And can we love each other out of our wounds and into our sacred divinity? And that right there is just embodied relating.
I think it's really interesting when you combine the idea of relational experiences with our bodies, right? And how movement and motion and touching the ground with your feet are both ways that sort of create this bubbling within our lived experiences. And it also creates this sense of internal creation. It creates community. It creates the world that we want to see when we are in community with one another, but then we also are fully committed into knowing who we are as individuals. And fully touched into our lived experiences. I was particularly touched in your book, and we're coming close on time. And I want to leave at least a few seconds for some other questions from some of our attendees, if there are any. But I love your last chapter because I think it kind of bookends perfectly with our 2-hour conversation today. We started on the topic of the Tennessee legislature and the hateful bills that are kind of navigating their way through. And then you have one of your last chapters in your book is about embodiment as a vision of democracy. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about that. Obviously, what you talk about in that book, in that chapter, stems from January 6th and that. But I think that there's a direct correlation between what's even happening at the legislature here in Tennessee and this vision for democracy. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that relationships shape and shift our world, and we can practice world building together, and we can practice democratic justice when we are more deeply embodied, when we have a deeper relationship with self and other. So I do a lot of Black Brown solidarity as a Latinx, and I believe that those relationships, Black and Brown solidarity, can shape and shift not just our justice movements, but they can shape and shift our democratic body. Why? Because when Black and Brown people are better in solidarity and better in relationship, we have a clear vision for how and why we need to get free. The system, the white sort of heteropatriarchal bullshit system, has pit us against each other. And that's by design. And so when we are better deeply embodied in relationship with one another, it's why I love Timothy Hughes so much, because I just supported Timothy's campaign at the Equity Alliance, and gonna have me a new license plate. And when we support one another's campaigns, we get a little bit closer to another possible world. And so I think that democracy is not a static thing. It is a moving target, and we have a chance to build the moving target when we love well. And revolutionary love is justice out loud. We can remake our world into the kind of world we want to inhabit when we do this in deep relationship.
Yeah. Yep. So we're going to transition to something quick and fun before, and then open this up for some questions for the last 2 minutes or so. But you have an event coming up this weekend.
I do, yes.
A book release event that's happening here in Nashville. Tell us a little bit about that, and I'll share the link.
Great. Well, I mean, this event would not be happening had Phil Cabucci not put it together. So this has really been a labor of love for all of us, and I just want to publicly thank Phil for calling me on the phone while I was driving to a meeting, and he said, "I will do this for you." And I'm like, okay, I don't have any time or bandwidth, but I really wanted to celebrate this book. He said this is worth celebrating, and I'm like, okay, let's do it. But the book event is an experience. It's an experience around embodiment. It's an experience with music. My friend and comrade Joe Luman, who is a Colombian immigrant living in California, is coming in for the event. And Joe and I are going to be in conversation about the book and about democracy and about bringing heaven to earth. There's going to be dance artists who are going to do some movement. There's going to be some music. Thistle Farms is hosting us, and I love the work of Thistle Farms. And so a big shout out to Thistle Farms for their generous work with us. But Thistle Farms will be providing food. Harding House is providing 3 cases of beer for those who like beer. We'll have some wine too for those who are wine drinkers, and of course water for those who are sober or just don't like alcohol. And we're gonna have a good time for a couple hours. I'm gonna sign books, and we've got a few more tickets left if folks want to join the fun. Starts at 5 and goes until 7. And, you know, really the hope is to start a conversation around democratic justice. Start a conversation with your friends and with your neighbors and with yourself about how do we be more deeply embodied? How do we read all the books about anti-racism and anti-violence? Yes, but how do we move from having talking points to having an embodied awareness around anti-racism? And let's remember that racism is white on white violence that was imported from Europe into these United States and has been weaponized against Black and brown people. And so how do we eradicate that? I think it starts with ourselves.
Well, thanks for the shout out, but it's not about me. It's about Robin and Joe. And I hope that each of you are able to attend this weekend.
Well,
On that-
Phil, I think this is our win for our community. This is
Fair.
yes, my name is on the book, but this is our win. And that's why all of my book events are in conversation and in collaboration. This is really a community win for all of our marginalized communities, not just the LGBTQIA community, but for Black communities, for Brown communities, for immigrant communities. This is really our win. And I'm trying to embody a kind of leadership that invites us into the work. I'm not trying to be a talking head. I'm trying to be in relationship with people who are trying to get their hands dirty.
If I could just jump in there,
hands dirty. So
yeah, if I could just jump in there, Phil, and just say,
yeah,
how amazing it is that they have taken a very private part of their life and put it out on paper, so that so many people can read and learn. When Jamie talked earlier about representation, it's that kind of representation from amazing, awesome people like that are standing up, fighting for so many people, and really shining a light on a lot of things, and good, bad, and indifferent. And I just want to say thank you very much, Robin, for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Somos en conjunto. We're together in this.
Indeed we are. Indeed we are. Oh, well, that wraps up our time today. And I want to thank each of my panelists and members of the community who have spoken up for this Trans Day of Visibility conversation with the Center for Nonprofit Management. I clearly need another cup of coffee to make it through the rest of my day. So thank you for this. I really appreciated it. We do have an upcoming conversation in May with some more details coming soon. And I look forward to having another in conversation with each of you. On that note, I do wish you all a good day. Actually, no, don't have a good day. Have a day that matters and make some change.
Yeah.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Hi, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.